We never know where life will lead us or what may hinder us along the way. But while every day can feel like one big question mark, it doesn't have to. With the right insights, strategies, and solutions from Western and Southern Financial Group, together we can look ahead to leave the unknown behind.
What's Pro Football Focus doing? Last week they had Brady. This week they got Brady.
We're literally doing it differently from everybody else.
As a matter of fact, moving forward from this point on, I will not make reference to PFF.
Do you not understand that they are that way because you're Joe Flacco?
And you just like to discredit things that people deserve credit for.
That you can't possibly be expected to defend that.
Talk about the game, Sam.
So,
who cares about what people think about us?
Yeah, I like football season, and all the things that go with it.
Welcome into the PFF NFL Podcast. Steve Palazzolo back here with Sam Monson on an early Monday morning with no games to review, but a whole offseason to look forward to. So we're going to be going through all of the AFC offseason team needs. We already hit the NFC. Go check that out. That was Thursday's podcast, along with a great interview with my former pitching coach, Tom House, Sam. That was my coach.
I was unfortunately not able to make it because the microphone crapped out on me.
You weren't. Listen to the interview, though, because we forgot to actually mention I did drive 5 hours to work with Tom House.
You did.
So that's why we had a fun little interview. That's Thursday's podcast. Before we get into it, though, don't forget, one more week where all first-time depositors at Monkey Knife Fight that put at least $20 into their account while using the promo code PFF will receive a free PFF Edge annual subscription. It's $40 of value for $20, and you get the opportunity to turn that 20 into even more money playing daily fantasy and prop games at one of the fastest-growing fantasy sports sites in the country. It's Monkey Knife Fight. So go to Monkey Knife Fight, deposit your $20, use the promo code PFF, and receive your free PFF Edge annual subscription today. Sam, one more week to go and do that. The draft guide is out, which is awesome. 477 pages of awesome, and one way to get it is through this deal from Monkey Knife Fight using the promo code PFF. You ready to go?
Yes, Steven. Let's roll.
Sorry I have to do so much talking before you get to be a part of this
Exist.
thing. Yeah. But it's good to have you here. Let's go through the AFC. We also have crazy news this weekend. If you're here, if you tuned in, wanting to know about Matthew Stafford, Jared Goff, and what we think, we broke it down all on the PFF Daily. We'll touch on it a little bit at the end of the show as well. I think there's some overarching QB market questions and things that we can hit on. But if you want the 11-minute, 11-second version, it's the PFF NFL Daily, breaking down the Jared Goff and Matthew Stafford trade.
It's a very precise number.
Well, I'm just looking at how long it was, and that's what it was.
Okay.
11-minute, 11-second podcast. All right, let's get into AFC offseason needs. As I said, we hit the NFC in the last show, so we'll go team by team. Starting with the Baltimore Ravens. Sam, you wrote this over at PFF.com. Wide receiver, interior offensive line, and safety as the biggest needs for the Ravens.
Yeah, wide receiver has to be the big one, right? I don't know what this offense looks like with a true elite number one X receiver. Julio Jones is the prototype that I keep coming back to anytime we make this point. I don't know what that looks like in this offense, but critically, I don't know that they know either. And I think at this point, given the relative struggles of that passing game, I think they owe it to themselves to find out, right? We don't know if that will be the cure-all, if they still have problems, if the issues run deeper, if they run to the offensive line, if the run game is that integral, if Lamar Jackson is flawed, if Greg Roman is flawed, but let's give them a true number one and find out what that fixes and what it doesn't fix. I think there is a good chance that this offense functions in a similar way to San Francisco's in terms of they don't need that true number one guy, right? They do need some decent high-end receiving options, but it doesn't necessarily need to come at that spot. But that's like the easiest thing to fix. So, let's do that and move from there.
Is this Ravens offense, I'm going to steal your analogy from, the last couple of years.
Be careful now.
Sean McVay and the Rams, you've basically said, look, they hit a point where they hit the league by storm. The Rams offense was great. They took it to a Super Bowl, but the league adjusted a little bit, and they needed to find 2.0. What's the adjustment off of that? Is this Ravens offense at that same exact point where they've done it with the run game? They knocked a 14-2 season out of it, 11-5 last year. Won a playoff game finally. After 3 long years, Lamar Jackson finally won a playoff game. But do they still need that 2.0, and it's going to come in the passing game and perhaps with a big name type of wide receiver?
Yeah, and it's not the first time that Greg Roman has run into that wall when he's created, one of these custom bespoke offenses. The Colin Kaepernick San Francisco offense had a similar issue where they never developed beyond that. They never hit that 2.0. They eventually got figured out. Teams figured out what they were doing in the pass game, that they weren't running through full field reads, and there was a way of essentially combating what they were doing and forcing them to something that wasn't in their wheelhouse. And they did it in San Francisco. It's happened in Baltimore. And the stuff that came out earlier in the season in terms of, defenses calling out what they're running before they're going to run it. Who knows the exact nature of what that was? Defenses are calling out what opposing offenses are doing all the time. So that in and of itself is not exactly breaking news. But if that is connected to the idea that this offense was becoming more predictable and hadn't developed beyond what they were doing initially, then yeah, every single offense in the NFL needs to show evolution, because defenses do. Defenses understand what you're doing, and after a given period of time, they're going to catch up to you. So you need to keep moving on. It's an arms race, and if you're not moving forward, you are moving backwards relative to how everybody's going to combat you.
In this Baltimore offense, though, I wonder, you keep citing it as like this true X receiver, which is, that's the guy that's usually on the solo receiver side, that you get the opposing best cornerback, and you got to win one-on-one. You describe it as a Julio Jones, but let's be realistic. There's not a lot of Julios out there. But even if we're looking at the free agent market, a Kenny Golladay, a Chris Godwin, an Allen Robinson, if you brought one of those guys in, is that the best fit for the Ravens offense, or is it a Will Fuller who just adds more speed? And it might be a little redundant to Marquise Brown on the other side, but I don't know. Who cares? Should the Ravens receivers be those types of guys, or in the draft, Kadarius Toney, who's a gimmick slot type of player, Rondale Moore, who is just an incredible space player? Are those the guys they should be adding? Just weapons that instill fear in the defense because they have Lamar in the running game and what they have elsewhere on this roster.
So this is like the 49ers dilemma. It's, do you need that true number one X-style receiver, or are you still a really dangerous offense if you just get good playmakers regardless of where they are? So, for years people were throwing this at the 49ers, and you would say, well, they do have a number one receiver. It's just George Kittle. It's a tight end, and they have Kyle Juszczyk as a fullback, and then they start drafting all these run after the catch monsters, these Brandon Ayuk's, Deebo Samuels, all that kind of stuff. But you saw the difference that an Emmanuel Sanders makes to this offense. Like a true, legitimate, conventional wide receiver did elevate the group. I think at this point, because the Ravens don't know what's missing or don't know exactly what's wrong with this passing attack, sure, the Will Fullers or just the speed receivers might tick the box, but let's try and answer the question once and for all. And let's just get the best true number one receiver you can find, and then figure out where things work beyond that. Will Fuller, the Ravens might just need speed, right? In addition to Marquise Brown. They might just need additional speed weapons that can scare defenses. But if you get a guy like Julio Jones, you have speed anyway. Julio Jones does what Will Fuller does plus 7 other things. So let's that.
Stop using Julio, though.
Well, whatever. Find Chris Godwin, right? Chris Godwin is fast enough. Plus he does 5 other things that Will Fuller doesn't do. So instead of saying, if we don't wind up with that, we can get a cheap version and get Will Fuller, and that just takes the top off a defense in addition to Marquise Brown. Okay, if everything goes to hell, let's do that. But let's focus in on the Chris Godwins of the world first. Or in the draft, a Devontae Smith. Let's do that first, and then figure out what a backup plan looks like if that doesn't work out for some reason.
Devontae, who you absolutely love. The other interesting one is interior offensive line, which, yes, the running game started to find its groove down the stretch. How much did that coincide with the poor schedule? But their guard play and center play really did take a step back in 2020. Bradley Bozeman at left guard, Ben Powers, Tyre Phillips. I mean, they had a lot of different guys playing right guard. And, the center position with Matt Skura, not a great year from him. Patrick Bakari had to play a little bit. So, yes. And then they had undrafted free agent Tristan Colon Castillo playing for a couple games, had a bad snap in there. So, yes, the interior of the offensive line definitely was a strength in 2018 and 19. You lose Marshall Yanda to retirement. So that's a place that they can attack this offseason. And then safety is an interesting one. And another one where they didn't really replace Earl Thomas from 2019, and the way they use their safeties and corners, well, really their safeties, sometimes as linebackers like Chuck Clark, all over the place. Adding more versatility there, I think, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I don't think they're bad at safety. It's just, this is a third position of need, and it's a position I think that could move the needle if they dramatically upgraded without, being a desperate problem on the roster already. But I think the offensive line was an issue inside, and in particular, most teams are looking for pass protectors first, and then you think about the run game. The Ravens are the reverse. You need some real road graders that can actually move people off the line of scrimmage and make these holes for Lamar Jackson in the run game, which in turn opens up the pass game and makes things easier for themselves. So, the tackles that the Ravens have are in one of the most beneficial schemes in the NFL in terms of making those guys look good and protecting them and limiting the number of straight dropbacks and true pass sets that they have to take. But to an extent, that sort of leans on the interior. And the interior is the area that fell apart. They got injured on a tackle as well. But the interior, when it stopped being able to just dominate people on the ground, was a part, I think, of the entire run game kind of slowly slowing down.
Is Orlando Brown trying to get out? Was that official, or was that?
I think he's trying to. He wants to be.
Or was that secretive stuff? That was in one of our chats. I don't remember.
It was in one of our chats, but I think he wants to be the left tackle. Like he, stepped over there this year when Ronnie Stanley got hurt. He's now like, well, I'm a left tackle now.
Wants to get paid as such. Orlando Brown's had a nice little career for a guy who had the worst combine in NFL history. He has started out with 3 solid grades, including a career high this past year, 77.7, with the majority of his work coming at left tackle.
He is like the reverse of, the Josh Allens and the quarterbacks that have all the toolsy quarterbacks recently have panned out. It's like, do you go back to the drawing board and start reevaluating what you think of a prospect quarterback? Like Orlando Brown had pretty good tape in college, but was one of the worst athletes the combine has ever seen. Just was big, a huge mountain of a human who couldn't really move. But he's been good. Now, you have to weigh that up against, as I said, that offense protects tackles to a huge degree, but he's been good. And, does that send people back to the drawing board of going, all right,
just get guys who block people.
Right. Maybe we don't need a spectacular athlete to tackle. Maybe we just need someone that's actually pretty good at blocking. And if he happens to be the size of Nebraska and therefore take some time to run around, that's all the better.
All right, let's move on to the Buffalo Bills, next team on the list in the AFC. The 3-team needs offensive tackle, cornerback, and interior defensive line. I was watching our friends over at 2-for-1 Drafts the other day, Austin Gale, Mike Renner. They were discussing, I think it was Mel Kiper's mock draft. It was either Mel or Daniel Jeremiah, and they gave the Bills Najee Harris, the running back, and they were citing how, Sean McDermott came out and said they got to run the ball better next year, right? So all the mocks are like, I'll give him a running back, even though I think Zach Moss, Devin Singletary, pretty good, guys breaking tackles. And Renner's point was, if you're going to improve the run game, get a guard. Guard would be a great spot for them at late in the first round. I just want to say the Bills roster, they're at this. You have to be so careful when you feel like you're 1 or 2 pieces away. I think the Bills have to be very careful to say, AFC Championship participant, drop the banner. We're there. We're close. Let's just get a guard. We're a guard away. Fix the run game. We'll be fine. I like the way we broke it down. Tackle, big position. You have to replace right tackle Darrell Williams. And then cornerback, a position that they haven't really attacked opposite Tre'Davious White over the last couple of years, and I think would go much further than even a guard.
Yeah, it's a good point. This roster is actually in really good shape right now in terms of when you go through. Yeah. When you go through, it's not easy to find obvious weaknesses and glaring holes, and you're like, okay, we got to attack this spot, otherwise everything goes to hell. But I think it's a good point that they're also not stacked across the board in many places. Obviously, the wide receiver core is amazing, but there aren't that many spots on this roster where you're like, yeah, they are loaded there. So therefore, you could basically pick your spot and just start adding players, start adding talent, and try and upgrade at critical spots. And that's basically what we've done here. Tackle, if you get better at offensive tackle, it's usually a good thing. Cornerback, Levi Wallace is that player to me where the underdog story that he is, they're going to be trying to replace him for like 10 years.
Oh, yeah.
Like he's going to be starting for 10 years, and every single offseason, somebody's going to be coming in to take his job, and he's probably going to outplay the guy every single time. But they're going to keep swinging because, as decent as Levi Wallace is, you can always upgrade over a Levi Wallace. It's just, it's not that easy to do. In order to upgrade over a guy like Levi, you actually need to get a good player at the position, which it's not, it's not the easiest thing in the world to achieve.
In the slot, Teron Johnson, he had some big plays down the stretch. He had, he's a pretty good slot. They brought Josh Norman in as kind of a, hey, let's kick the tires on Norman. They did that last year. He was fine, when he was out there. But again, I think that having a legitimate, consistent number 2 opposite Tre'Davious White would be really, really helpful and add some flexibility to a defense that does like to move Tre'Davious around at times.
Yeah, Levi Wallace for his career has given up a passer rating of 87, including the playoffs, which I think is...
He's Prince Amukamara.
No, he's slight... Yeah, okay, yeah.
Who I like. I think he's a good, solid player.
He is. Like, he's this guy that's going to be 10 points in passer rating better than league average for his career. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, he is moving the needle slightly in your direction over just being the average NFL player. Plus, the other thing working against him is that he's like 112 pounds, like lightweight. At least Amukamara had prototypical size, whereas Levi's also battling against the idea that he's skinny and undrafted and all those kinds of things as well.
So going back to offensive tackle a little bit, though, Darrell Williams, as we mentioned, a free agent. He paired with Deion Dawkins. Dawkins had an 80 grade. Williams a 79. Everybody on the interior was in mid-60s.
Yeah. So
the clear strength of the Bills' offensive line was at tackle, whether it's locking Darrell Williams up or just finding a replacement at right tackle. I do think that is huge. This is the Bills just kind of maintaining status quo, and this happens every offseason. When you have to replace players, it's unexciting, but it's necessary. And I just think the Bills, again, they just have to be really careful. And the analysis of the Bills has to be really careful not to just let's just fill this hole, and then we're good. We'll stay. You have to continue to keep moving forward because everybody around you is still getting better. And you really have to they probably need 2 good corners because you're still trying to beat the Chiefs, the team that beat you in the AFC Championship. That's the goal, is to beat the Chiefs. They should be getting 4 different corners, in the Randy Moss plan here because you're trying to beat the Chiefs.
Yeah, I mean, the tackle is a good example of... Yeah, sure. Based on this year's roster, obviously guard is a bigger issue. But Darrell Williams is a free agent. He had an 80 overall PFF grade, gave up 21 pressures across 1,000 snaps of action. That's a pretty good player, and he's about to walk out the door. So whilst he was a much smaller need than the guards this year, right now on paper, the tackle is probably weaker because he isn't there, and you've got a nobody. You've got a Madden creative player at right tackle, and that's probably worse than the guard play that you had this year. So, hit tackle first because it's a more important position.
We also put interior defensive line on the list. Ed Oliver, in his second year after being drafted in the first round, not great in the run game. He's another guy, flash plays here and there. You'll see him, penetrate into the backfield, make some big plays, but he get absolutely owned at times and just blown off the ball. Starlo Tulele, he opted out. That kind of hurt, I think, a little bit up front, but they were pushed around quite a bit this year on the interior of the defensive line. I think they could, depending on what they want to do schematically, and we always talked about how they invite the run and all that stuff, they could probably use that true nose tackle, that guy who just, plays multiple gaps if needed, but just an excellent interior run defender that allows them to play with a light box. So they're not getting torched for 8 yards per carry in certain games.
Well, the big problem with Ed Oliver is that he was abysmal against the run and not great as a pass rusher, leaving him as just a 280-pound guy in the middle. Oliver was such a weird player coming out because supreme athleticism, one of the freakiest athletes at the position we've ever seen, but wasn't polished in terms of being a complete player in the way Aaron Donald was when he came out. So the two drew a lot of comparisons because they're both undersized, athletic, interior pass rushers or interior players, but they were completely different stylistically, even independent of how they were used in college. So Oliver has now become this player that can't defend the run and hasn't yet developed in terms of a pass rusher to the point where you can live with it. So if Oliver had taken steps forward and become a sort of Aaron Donald-esque pass rusher, or even not Aaron Donald-esque, but Aaron Donald light, right? An impact pass rusher from the interior, a guy that was had a PFF pass rushing grade in the 80s, was generating 50-plus pressures a year. At that point, you could go, okay, I don't really care that he can't defend the run.
Well, that'd be worth it.
Yeah, but he isn't. Right now, he's just a guy that generates 30-something pressures a year, is okay as a pass rusher, and then gets annihilated whenever he has to defend the run, at which point, that's a problem now.
Ironically, though, he was really good in the run game from a grading standpoint coming out of Houston. Playing in a tough role, but he penetrated. He was just difficult to block, and he did it without great technique. That has kind of caught up to him so far at the NFL level.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good example of strength of competition.
Yeah.
You can play like that at Houston because you're a superior athlete. You probably can't in the NFL.
So just something to keep an eye on when it comes to the Bills and this offseason. They're in a fascinating spot. We've seen, this was, the Jaguars a few years ago. Didn't seem like they had any holes coming off their AFC Championship loss. And even the year before that, it's they really didn't have any massive holes. They added Leonard Fournette at 4th overall. So just be careful, Bills. Keep attacking. Keep going for the Chiefs, not just filling out the roster. The hometown Cincinnati Bengals, we went with interior offensive line and offensive tackle. Both massive needs for the Bengals, and cornerback. I would also throw a wide receiver.
Yeah, I mean, they're the opposite of the Bills. I mean, you could find holes everywhere. Assuming you're going to say they don't need a quarterback because they drafted one, and let's hope his knee is okay. Everything else on this roster needs help.
Yeah, so obviously the offensive line, not just because Joe Burrow got hurt. We knew that Burrow was going to struggle with being put under pressure quite a bit.
Yeah, but
as a rookie.
So it is just because Joe Burrow got hurt, but that's just the inevitable conclusion of where this was headed, right? If you don't fix this offensive line, your star quarterback that you drafted number 1 overall to transform this franchise is going to get hurt, and that's exactly what happened. It was going to happen eventually, so let's ensure that never happens again. Let's try and repair an offensive line in front of him that actually functions. And right now, they've got maybe one viable starter.
So Jonah Williams is the one viable starter.
Yeah.
First-round pick from a couple years ago. Let's say he's the left tackle. If they were to draft Penei Sewell, you put Jonah Williams back on the right side. Penei plays left. Jonah did play at the right tackle at Alabama for a little bit. That's a nice starting point.
Yeah.
And then, do they get a Joe Thuney in free agency at guard? I mean, I think they need to find 3 starters this year just to creep back toward average.
Yeah,
right? Whether it's in the draft or in free agency.
Which is not a good place to be. I mean, we've talked before about, anytime you, like the Jets example last year, anytime you need to find an entire offensive line worth of starters in one offseason, your strike rate on that is just, it's never going to be that high. You're not going to do that. You're not going to achieve 5 new starters, all of whom keep their head above water for next year. So you've just got to hope you hit what you hit. I mean, Sewell, I think, makes a lot of sense because he's one of the best tackle prospects to come along in a long, long time. So let's assume that that's a guy that can get plugged in and be good right off the bat. That potentially gives you 2 spots done. Now, if you have to hit 3 more positions, let's try and get 1 or 2 of them to the point where they're not issues. And then you can start to attack during game plans, you can start to hide the weaknesses. Now you know that only one of these guys is a turnstile, and we can start working to mitigate that with the game plan. When all 5 guys are turnstiles, there's nothing you can do. You're just going to be in trouble.
The interesting thing about Sewell, and I've made this point about the Bengals before, right? At number 5 overall, he might be there. I also wonder if getting a Jamar Chase or your boy Devontae Smith or having another receiver would be the better move there in the first round. Right, you pair them with T. Higgins, nice little rookie season, but you don't want to go into the season with just T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd. I don't think they're both. I think they're both good complementary pieces. Having a third piece though, which they didn't have this year, they had it in name only in AJ Green. So you add another receiver there. All right, Joe Burrow's life's a lot better. It is a good offseason for starting caliber tackles. So Penei Sewell might be the generational tackle prospect, but in free agency, if you just needed either a Band-Aid or a solid starter, Russell Okung, Alejandro Villanueva, Darrell Williams, who we mentioned, Kelvin Beachum, even, like, these are guys that are massive upgrades over what they had. You might be better off drafting a good receiver, getting one of those tackles, or in the draft, there are guys like Tevin Jenkins who could be late first or on the turn in the second round, Alex Leatherwood. I mean, there are starting caliber tackles out there where this year maybe getting Penei Sewell isn't the best option for them.
The fact that it's a good tackle draft, I think, makes that an interesting discussion more than it normally would. But to me, this is a perfect example of the value in, or the distance between Penei Sewell and the next best guy in any given year is substantial enough that I think you just take that and you work out receiver elsewhere. And it's a great year for wide receiver in free agency. Chris Godwin, Kenny Golladay, all those guys, Allen Robinson. There's a ton of those guys if you wanted to go that route. It's also always a great wide receiver draft. Like the way the college landscape is right now, year after year, we're talking about this is the best wide receiver group to come along since the last one. And I think the same thing is true this year. So, and there's now becoming this growing movement of, because wide receiver is so abundant in terms of draft prospects coming out, do you wait, right? We've been talking before about it. They're so valuable, getting this difference maker at wide receiver. You should always take these guys. They should be the guy going number 2 overall, number 3 overall versus the safe tackle or whoever it is that normally goes at that spot after the quarterbacks. But there's now this thought of, well, if they're so abundant and so easy to get, do you start waiting until round 2 and 3 and instead snag the guy at the position that's just harder to find? So I think the Bengals are actually in a good spot to take a Penei Sewell and then come back in the second round and still get essentially a first-round caliber wide receiver.
You used my same argument against me, just reverse the positions.
But because Sewell is the guy that's seen as the generational talent to tackle, get him. Like if you,
I get it. Yeah.
If you were telling me that there was an equivalent Penei Sewell in the draft at wide receiver, I think that would be the argument to make. That get this guy, take tackle in free agency or whatever. But Sewell is that guy.
Yeah, it's an interesting discussion that I think they should be having down the street at the Bengals offices. Either way, I think they're looking for 3 starters on the offensive line. And then, they brought Quentin Spain in, for a little bit last year. If Quentin Spain is
your weak link,
if he's your weak link, you're okay.
Right.
If Quentin Spain's your second best offensive lineman, you're in trouble. So that's what the Bengals are. That's how they're trying to flip the script as far as offensive line goes. You mentioned, yes, there are holes everywhere. We listed cornerback. I mean, they're losing William Jackson III potentially. He's hitting free agency. So I think they have to continue to build back to front along that defense.
And Alexander, right? He's
Mackenzie Alexander, both.
So they've basically got one starter, and it's Trey Waynes.
Yeah,
it's not great.
It's not a great place to be.
Literally, as I said, scratch quarterback off the list. Every other position on this roster could be upgraded easily.
Let's move on to the Cleveland Browns. This is an interesting one because you listed everything in the middle of the field, of the middle of the defense. Safety, linebacker, interior of the defensive line. And those are, in general, slightly less valuable positions. Maybe not safety because, high-end safety is really good, but slightly less valuable positions. But it's the old adage, you build through the middle, and we would suggest you actually build on the edges.
And I wouldn't argue with you if you said cornerback was a need as well. I think they're going to look at that and say, all right, we have Denzel Ward. That's a good spot at one cornerback. We've got guys coming back from injury at the other spot, Greedy Williams or whoever. cornerback is not a disaster if we get plus play in the middle. And we haven't had that this season. Like when Andrew Sendejo is playing like 1,000 snaps and, letting everything pass him in the middle of the field, just makes everything worse. The way the Minnesota Vikings have been able to sort of patch up questionable cornerback play for a while by having essentially a pair of all-pro safeties.
And Andrew Sendejo. The Browns last year had the exact opposite of that. It's like everything on the outside looks worse because the inside is such a complete disaster. Safety, linebacker, teams are just passing all over the middle of the field. Whereas Harrison Smith and Anthony Harris are sort of squeezing those throwing lanes and forcing everything outside to tighten the amount of space you have to cover as a cornerback, Andrew Sendejo is doing the exact opposite and essentially magnifying the amount of space that you have to try and cover a guy one-on-one and making you look like an idiot. So I think that the bigger needle mover is actually to fix that than it is to try and upgrade over a Greedy Williams or a Terrence Mitchell or whoever it is outside. Ronnie Harrison was solid this year. I always like bringing Carl Joseph in, taking a flyer on Carl Joseph. He did have his worst season this year. I'm back and forth between when I like a player and like their skill set, like Carl Joseph, and when multiple coaching staffs
have given up on them.
Give up on them, right? When that, it's kind of like Josh Rosen. Like if you're in love with Josh Rosen and you're like, wait, he's had 4 coaching staffs quit on him. At what point am I just wrong?
Yeah.
No matter what I like. That's how I feel about Carl Joseph. Like, he could do this, he could do that, he could do a little dabble and do a little bit of everything.
At some point, the common denominator becomes you.
At some point, yes. So he didn't have a great year. So I could see safety. Linebacker I think was a massive need last year. I don't know. I think it's kind of like what we said about the Ravens last year. Like I don't know if they're going to value linebacker. The Ravens did draft a linebacker.
I mean, linebacker is also the horrible spot to need help in right now because where do you go? Like there's like 2 good linebackers in the NFL right now. The way that those guys are being attacked by opposing offenses. If you don't have Fred Warner or Eric Kendricks, Bobby Wagner, you're basically screwed.
Levante David.
But Levante is getting old and hitting free agency. You're not finding plus play that's going to impact your defense, particularly if you're looking in the draft. I mean, Roquan Smith was a linebacker we absolutely loved coming out because of what he could do in coverage and all those kinds of things. Roquan has struggled transitioning to the NFL level, and even now, like everybody in Chicago wants him as an all-pro, and he hasn't been that good. He's been better, but it's taken him a few years to get there, and he still isn't moving the needle as much as a Fred Warner or an Eric Kendricks. If you need linebacker play, if your linebacker situation is a disaster right now and you need an upgrade at that position, I don't know how successful you're going to be, even if you're targeting, Micah Parsons, one of the best linebacker prospects to come along in a decade. Right now, that position is it's the one under the boot of opposing schemes. I
still think that the Browns will think about using their safeties more there too. I mean, they had B.J. Goodson, Sione Takitaki as solid run defenders or whatever, but adding a safety up into the box and using those types of players to mask some linebacker deficiencies is smart. Interior defensive line, Larry Ogunjobi, who has a good reputation as he's never really graded all that great. He was
the 1 year,
unbelievable. Yes, and unbelievable in week 1.
Yeah, this
year it was like, all right, here we go, unrestricted free agent, breakout year, and he still settled back.
I really don't understand why he isn't better. He showed, that first year showed that he could do it, and then every time you watch him, you look at him, and he makes some plays, and the physical tools are all there. Like, why is he not consistently better than he is?
I don't know.
Okay.
It's really just been in flashes, and there's a lot of guys like him who I feel just maybe play too many snaps. It's like he played 747 snaps this year, 770 the year before, 930 the year before. When you have guys that do stuff in flashes, maybe they're just 400 or 500 snap guys.
His PFF run defense grade has gotten worse every single season.
Right,
so
and that's where that's where his skill set should play. He was good. He was a good run defender in college at Charlotte.
And that first year, he had a run defense grade of 84. Was making all these plays in the backfield, tackles for loss, just wrecking people in the run game. Didn't really bring anything as a pass rusher, but that was okay because that was his skill set. Then it went from 84 to 67 to to 60 to 54. He's just gotten progressively worse and in big jumps. Like that's a significant step backwards every single season, whilst not getting any better as a pass rusher.
Yeah, so basically the interior of the entire defense needs a look. Jordan Elliott, the guy that we thought, we liked him as a first-round prospect last year. We'll see if he could develop opposite Sheldon Richardson.
That would help a lot.
It would really help as far as one of those needs goes. All right, Denver Broncos, next team on the AFC list here. Quarterback, number 1, Sam. Cornerback, and interior offensive line.
Well, you did see, because I told you this.
Well, let's discuss the stories.
The Broncos were apparently in on the Matthew Stafford sweepstakes, but pulled out because Detroit wanted Drew Lock as part of the package. Right? Evidently, they were happy to trade Matthew Stafford as long as they were going to get some kind of quarterback from somebody back in as part of the deal, so that they weren't rolling into 2021 with essentially no quarterback. And I'm kind of blown away that if you're Denver, you don't pull the trigger on that. I understand still being attached to Drew Lock and still thinking that there is the chance you can get the whatever the ceiling of Drew Lock is out of him in future. I don't think that what he did this year necessarily condemns him to life as a bust and a disaster and no future. I think there is still potential there that Drew Lock could work out as, a viable starting quarterback in the future. On the other hand, you can't possibly be convinced of that. And right now you need to get rid of him as your starting quarterback. And if those two things are in conflict, get rid of him. Like you can't be so attached to him now that you prevent it from, or allow it to prevent you from getting a, high-end viable quarterback. And yet they were.
It's so funny how you talk about Stafford in different terms depending on what point you're trying to make.
High-end valuable quarterback. He's high-end compared with a Drew
Is he
Lock.
a coach killer or is he a high valuable?
He's both.
Okay.
He's if you are looking for Matthew Stafford to become a top 5 quarterback and put it all together and realize the potential of the crazy no-look passes and, the elite arm strength and the NFL Films highlight reel plays and all those kinds of things. If you think that one year he's going to put all that together and you're going to get like 16 games worth of peak Stafford and he ends up with like a high, bordering on that 90 grade PFF, I don't think that's ever happening. At which point, if you're betting on that year after year after year, he's going to be a coach killer and you're going to end up looking for a new job somewhere.
I want to discuss that later because I think I have a better proxy for what Stafford might be.
But if Drew Lock is your starting quarterback, like, hell yes, Matthew Stafford is a high-end quarterback. He takes you from, like, literally number 31 or 32 in terms of starting quarterbacks in the NFL to like 10 or 11, which is huge.
There's two ways of looking at Drew Lock, I think. I liked the fact that they took him in the second round. Remember, in the 2019 draft, he was their 3rd selection. Noah Fant, Dalton Reisner, 2 starters, and then Drew Lock, who I think was a good second-round quarterback. And when you get a second-round quarterback, you hope that they become a Derek Carr, right? Which is a good, viable starter. A comparable starter to Matthew Stafford. But
he, by the way, is the counter to the sequence of toolsy quarterbacks that have all worked out.
But this is the opposite of this. This is what I was going to bring up. Because he started late in 2019, he only has about a year's worth of reps, right? He only has 599 career attempts. So technically he's got a year of experience, not 2, in his 2 years in the league. The FOMO is strong in Denver. Their fear that he is going to go figure it out in Detroit.
Yeah.
And the recency bias of seeing Josh Allen in year 3 become an MVP candidate. Drew Lock does not have Josh Allen's caliber of tools, but he's a toolsy, IKEA quarterback light.
IKEA light.
To use your
What is IKEA
term.
light? Like IKEA is already a sort of budget Scandinavian furniture outlet. Where do you go cheaper than that?
It's just like a lesser version of something you would buy at IKEA.
Okay.
I would say. Which, by the way,
you're only saying that because you can't think of an IKEA light.
As a store, no.
Yeah.
There's actually no such thing as IKEA light. There is.
Oh, I think there is. I just don't know what it is.
No, there is not a worse store in the world.
Oh, there's not a store that I hate being in more, but I guarantee you there is like a cheaper version of IKEA kicking around the place.
Kelly, we need some stuff, and Kelly's like, hey,
you couldn't pay me to go to IKEA.
I said,
I'm not doing it.
Absolutely not.
Yes,
I will never. I cannot. That's worth an entire show.
And the entire thing is designed to keep you locked in there and trapped.
Yes.
In this
You're trapped for
giant
3 hours
labyrinth of a warehouse of furniture.
While they are advertising disgusting-looking meatballs.
And then at the end of it all, you have to grab the crap that you want off the shelf and drag it to the checkout.
And you're so hungry, you actually want to buy the meatballs at their cafeteria.
So that's IKEA done as a sponsor. We're not getting them.
I'm okay with it.
Yeah?
I'm okay with it.
Well, especially if they send you free stuff. Like, congratulations, IKEA, your sponsor. Here's your box of crap you need to put together.
I went over to my friends at Bargains and Buyouts over here in Cincinnati. That's where I get some stuff. my buddy runs the place, so that I'd much. So we went there instead of IKEA.
Yeah.
So Drew Lock, IKEA quarterback light.
Okay.
And there's a little FOMO in Denver, where they're like, "Listen, I don't want Drew Lock to be my starter, but it'd be cool if he was my backup, just in case."
No, they do. Yes, I get it entirely. I understand that you want to keep Drew Lock there because, as I said, I think there is a chance that he works it out, particularly if you don't need him starting next year. If he can sit on the bench and, actually learn and develop and blah, blah, blah. I understand 100% that all things being equal, you would rather keep Drew Lock in the building than not. But if that's the cost of getting the quarterback that actually is a useful starter for you, you have to make it happen. You've already dumped him. Like, this is why you're talking about Matthew Stafford in the first place, is because Drew Lock has not worked out for you. You can't, therefore, allow that to prevent you upgrading on him. That doesn't make any sense.
I don't mind setting that price because we talked about how much the Rams had to give up to get Matthew Stafford. I don't think that'd be a good move by the Broncos to try to match that. They set up.
Well, that's a different argument.
They set a price first. Let's say it was a first rounder, but we don't want to give up Drew Lock. I think that's okay. On the other hand, the Broncos, if they're going to compete with the Chiefs, with the playmakers that they have, they are close. We keep saying that the Broncos are close, and they might be a quarterback away, and Stafford could be that quarterback. With these playmakers, with the guys that the Broncos have put a pretty good, roster in place, both sides of the ball. Got to upgrade cornerback, I think, but which is number 2 on the list. Corner, definitely a major issue in Denver. Vic Fangio, I always mention, he's the guy that's kind of done more with less at the cornerback position through the years, but you'd still like to have more consistency. Yeah, they all got hurt this past year too, which didn't help, but cornerback definitely a place that they should be attacking. But overall, I don't hate the strategy of kind of like setting a price saying we want to keep Drew Lock. All right, we lost out on Matthew Stafford. Let's go to the next guy.
I think the argument of we're not matching the Rams trade haul is a different one. Like and that's not what was being reported. This idea of the price just got too high and we walked away. That's not what they're saying. What they're saying is they essentially had a deal, or they were close to being on the same page, but when Detroit said we want Drew Lock as part of this package, Denver was like, whoa, no, we can't do that. That to me makes no sense. You've already decided that Drew Lock's play has left you with the requirement of replacing him as the starter, at which point you can't allow him to prevent you from achieving that. That makes no sense whatsoever to me. Yes, cornerback, like their best cornerback was Bryce Callahan, who's a slot player. Now, Bryce Callahan had an amazing season for a slot player.
He's a good player.
Allowed a passer rating of 46.9, which for and a completion percentage of 54%. Slot players generally allow completion percentages above 2/3, 66 and above. To be where Bryce Callahan was this season is crazy. Also, he had to moonlight outside multiple times because everybody else got hurt. So he was a 5'8" slot guy who had to play outside in the perimeter and did a really good job doing that. He had an amazing season and went massively under the radar compared to what he did. But basically everybody else there can't be playing anymore. Unless they take massive steps forward in years 2 and 3, Michael Ojemudia, et cetera, had some good play, but was otherwise, lit on fire to the tune of a passer rating of 120. Those guys need to be upgraded upon. And, A.J. Boye brought in as a sort of, let's roll the dice. This guy was once an all-pro caliber player. Not so much anymore.
Good numbers there, Sam. All coming from PFF Elite, which you guys can get for 25% off this week. Promo code Super Bowl 25, Super Bowl 25 for all PFF subscriptions. That's Edge or Elite. So Both Edge and Elite bring the draft guide to the table, 477 pages of awesome, plus all the updates that come with it. You get 25% off Edge or Elite, so you get the draft guide, but if you're looking for the grades and the stats that you were citing, that's all part of PFF Elite. So good time to get 25% off right now. Super Bowl 25 is the promo code through the Super Bowl, so do it this week. All right, who's the next AFC team here? The Houston Texans.
Ooh.
You have an hour?
Well, they're in the same spot as the Cincinnati Bengals. They need everything, and including potentially quarterback if they trade him away.
What does the Matthew Stafford trade do for Deshaun Watson's value?
I don't know. I mean, in theory, it should only make it higher, right? If Stafford is going for 2 firsts, a third, and Jared Goff, then Deshaun Watson is theoretically worth all of the first-round picks.
Let me ask you something. You've been around NFL types and NFL people. You know how they think a little bit. You know that they're not watching 700 snaps. They're not watching all 700 dropbacks of Deshaun Watson and Matthew Stafford side by side. They're watching a handful. Mm-hmm. When you watch a handful of Matthew Stafford snaps, you can think he's a top 5 quarterback. Mm-hmm. Do you think that the NFL, when they're putting Watson next to Stafford, in our terms, Watson was the number 3 overall quarterback. Stafford has been in the teens for the majority of his career. Watson's on the ascent. Stafford's been, solid, good, fine. But do you think the NFL has them much closer because of the silly arm talenty type of things that Matthew Stafford does?
I would bet you can find people that think that Stafford is the same caliber of player as Deshaun Watson, just older.
Yeah.
Which I would say.
And age is a big issue
crazy.
Here, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah. I would bet you can find people like that in the NFL that think they're at the same level, but Stafford is, just older. Which I think is lunacy, ludicrous, madness, wrong. Those two
on the
players.
other hand, using PFF grades, last year they were very similar. From a grading standpoint, in 2019, very similar.
But Stafford, that was the high end of Stafford for 8 games before he got hurt.
And this is Watson on the upswing.
Right, and was Watson's baseline before he took off into the stratosphere. I do think that there are 2 players that are wildly, the jury on them is all over the place. There are people on Twitter that think Matthew Stafford is like the best quarterback in the NFL. Detroit has been wasting him for his entire career. Now the man's going to go there to Los Angeles and be an all-pro and look ridiculous, and crazy. And then there are people that are like, Deshaun Watson won 4 games. How good can he be? Both of those, I think, are nuts. Like Deshaun Watson, we've been talking about him as the second biggest asset in the NFL after Patrick Mahomes. When you look at what he's been doing there with his number 1 receiver was traded away in the offseason with a bunch of guys that have some speed but aren't massive difference makers to your offense. Not a great offensive line, no head coach for most of the season. What Deshaun Watson did this year was crazy, and his baseline has been absurdly high and consistent before that point. I think he is right up there with the best quarterbacks in the NFL, and given his age and profile, I don't think he's getting worse over the next few years. He's already locked down to a contract. I mean, he is the perfect asset to acquire for if you need a quarterback.
I'd say the best proxy, let's just make this comparison. The best proxy for Watson, I would say, is like getting Russell Wilson back in year 5. And I would say the majority of Russell Wilson's career, he has been the quote-unquote tier 2 quarterback in my tier system in my head, where tier 1 has always been Brady and Rodgers, Breeze, Peyton, and now probably Mahomes, right? I think the majority of Wilson's career, he's been there, and he's had years where he's jumped up into tier 1. Maybe these last couple of years, he's a tier 1 guy. Watson, after a few years, I think was a tier 2 type of quarterback, and now he's stepped up, number 3 overall quarterback this past year. I think you need another year like that to say, okay, he's a tier 1 guy. I mean, this is like trading for Russell Wilson with it, year 4 or 5 of his career. I think the Stafford one, and on the daily we compared it to Cutler, which might be, but a higher end of Cutler. I think a better comparison there might be Carson Palmer late in his career, where Palmer, with former number 1 overall pick, cannon for an arm, throw on the highlight reel for Palmer, and he's making special throws left and right, and that's what people are trying to. So it's like Russell Wilson versus late career Carson Palmer, who did stitch together one MVP caliber season. I think that's a better proxy for Stafford. But I don't think, that's consistent year in, year out baseline of success with Watson versus we're kind of hoping for a peak year from Stafford. So based off that, I don't think their value's in the same ballpark. No. Now, that brings up the point. What are the Texans potentially going to get for Deshaun Watson in all of their holes? Cornerback, edge defender, safety. They're all on the defensive side of the ball. This thing has been, if you're going to make the argument against Watson only winning 4 games this year, then you have to look to the previous season when the defense was horrendous and they did go to the play. They were a playoff team. They were in there competing with the Chiefs for 3 quarters, and not because of their defense, but because of their offense and Watson and what they were able to do.
Yeah, their defense has been abysmal.
For years, it's just been getting worse and worse.
Yeah, and they're not, again, this is not an exhaustive list of their needs. They need pretty much everything. So, pick your position, you could be upgraded upon. But this year featured a sequence of disastrous defenses in the bottom 5, of which Houston was one of them. Detroit, Jacksonville, Houston, they were a group of the worst defenses in the NFL. They allowed 6.2 yards per play, which is a massive figure. It didn't matter what Deshaun Watson was doing on offense because every time the things got down towards the end, the Texans couldn't stop anybody. So if they had the ball last, or if the opposition had the ball last, you were probably losing. And that's what Watson was faced with. They don't have anybody on defense, I think, that you would say this guy is a guaranteed superstar and not upgradable upon. J.J. Watt would be the guy you would normally point to, but Watt this season was a shadow of his former self. Not that he was bad, but he went immediately from elite play. J.J. Watt was Aaron Donald before Donald was in the league. Then he got injured a bunch of times, came back and was always pretty close to that level, never quite got back there, but was always, even post-injury, J.J. Watt is one of the best players in the NFL on the defensive line. And then last year was the first season we were like, wow, that was a big step back from where he normally is. And given his age and injury history, is that the start of a fairly precipitous decline, or was that just a bad year?
And still by far the best player in that front 7. When he's right next to Whitney Merciless and Charles Omenihu and Ross Blacklock. Guys that just really struggled up front. And I was disappointed in the linebacker play. Zach Cunningham took a step back. Benardrick McKinney did take a step back before getting hurt.
Cunningham had 1 million tackles, though, so everybody thinks he was good.
I love Zach Cunningham. You won't find a bigger Zach Cunningham fan than me, but he's been an excellent run defender who just, blown gaps and missed tackles this year, which do count. It's the same linebacker discussion. People just count tackles and not negative plays.
It's only occurred to me that you could use that. You should use that all the time. You won't find a bigger X than me, because you're 6'10". You see, it's funny.
You just
you should just drop that all the time. I'm the biggest whatever fan you're going to find.
What if the Big Show is a big Zach Cunningham fan?
Look, that's a risk you run, but what are the chances of that happening? How often are you and the Big Show in the same conversation? It's not often.
Last year at this time, what a missed opportunity.
I'm just saying, the average person's height in this country is 5'11".
So I am the biggest.
So you've got a lot, you have a lot of room for that joke to work.
Last year at this time, it was me, the Big Show, and Shaq all in the same room, and we couldn't get a picture.
This is true.
We could not get a picture during Super Bowl week. Anyway, the Texans need everything, particularly on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah.
So as crazy it is, and they don't want to trade Deshaun Watson, I think.
Which is ridiculous, by the way.
That they don't want to trade him?
The damage has already been done, and then suddenly everybody that's in the building is like, oh, yeah, we don't want to trade him.
Why is that ridiculous?
Because you've already burnt the bridge.
Doesn't matter.
Of course it matters. He's pissed off. He wants out. You're going to be like, oh, that's not happening now. Then maybe you should have addressed that beforehand.
You mend it.
Good luck mending that bridge.
Troy Aikman came out and said something similar. I saw it more paraphrased, not what Troy said, about how he wanted out in Dallas. Him and Jimmy were at odds. And, Troy is suggesting that the Texans stick with him. Stick with him like Dallas stuck with me. It all worked out. They don't want to trade Deshaun Watson, which isn't crazy because of everything we just described. He's the second best asset in the NFL. Of course they don't want to trade him.
Not wanting to trade him isn't the crazy part. And coming out and being like, oh, yeah, we don't want to trade you after you just did all the things that pissed him off that made him want to go out the door in the first place is the crazy part. Like, this would have been really easy to keep him on side to the point where he didn't want out in the first place. But instead, you went and like set fire to the guy's front lawn and then are surprised that he wants to move house. And you're like, oh, well, what's your problem? We're not letting that happen.
The point I was going to make is that they don't want to trade him, which is correct in not wanting to trade him. But I'm curious how intrigued Nick Caserio might be seeing the glaring holes everywhere and saying, well, if I can get 4 first-rounders and a second-rounder, I can accelerate this process and we'll figure it out.
Whatever about all the other offers, right? The Texans should absolutely find out how high they can push the Miami Dolphins offer.
True.
Because Miami has all of the first-round picks, plus a bunch of high second-round picks, and Tua. And whatever you think about Tua's projection and long-term ability, and he's at least a quarterback that was taken in the top 5 that we are not sure can't be a viable NFL starter at this point. So if you're going to get rid of Deshaun Watson, that is as good a haul as you could possibly have. A potentially franchise defining draft or group of draft picks plus a potentially viable starting quarterback. So we don't want to trade him, but let's at least find out what that looks like.
Oh, I would investigate. Yeah, because you have to be able to weigh it. You have to be able to do the analysis. What do we look like with Watson? What do we look like with Tua plus or 15 picks or whatever it could be on the other side? Let's go Indianapolis Colts now. How hard could it be in this AFC South? Pretty difficult, it seems.
Yeah.
Can't even hold on to Deshaun Watson, maybe. Colts obviously need a quarterback with Phillip Rivers retiring. We also went edge defender and receiver. We've made the point many times. It's a playoff caliber roster other than QB. And I think receiver on here is, the other big one.
It's an interesting roster, actually, because they do have some holes, but they're good.
Yes.
It's clearly good enough to get to the playoffs and potentially make some noise once they get there if they get the quarterback, which obviously is the biggest need. When Rivers isn't there, he was brought in as the guy. They were a quarterback away from making the playoffs. Rivers comes in, makes that leap, then retires. Matthew Stafford made a lot of sense. The Colts will be in on every potentially available quarterback this entire offseason because they're in the same spot. That roster is good enough to win right now. They don't want to have to return to a Jacoby Brissett or whoever the new Jacoby Brissett will be. So they have to make a run at somebody and secure one of them.
They it's Burt Breer's article where we're getting a lot of the information as far as what teams offered. The Colts did not offer their first round pick for Matthew Stafford. I don't know what else it was. I mean, I don't know if it was just a second, multiple seconds. Clearly they're valuing their picks and they're not going to go crazy in this quarterback market. Is that a mistake? Have they built up, again, enough of a roster that Stafford would actually be more valuable for them, the Colts, than he would be for, say, the Rams, who are, have a good roster. They feel like they're close, but they're kind of depleted in other places as far as draft capital goes.
The Colts are also in a weird spot because they still have all of the salary cap space. Remember, last year, part of the DeForest Buckner deal was they basically needed to spend some money. There's a salary cap floor, and the Colts were in danger of not even reaching it. So you trade your first-round pick for DeForest Buckner, and that in and of itself is a big move, but you then have to pay DeForest Buckner, and you make him the highest-paid interior defender in the NFL. Even after all of that, they still have the second most cap space in the NFL behind the Jags, who gutted their entire roster to rebuild this thing.
The Colts do feel like the team, because when we cite free agent wide receivers, I know we're working off the PFF free agency list, which has 3 players in the top 4 that are receivers, and we always mention Chris Godwin, Allen Robinson, and Kenny Golladay. I think Godwin gets franchised by the Bucs, knowing that the Lions are rebuilding and that the Bears probably, I don't think Allen Robinson wants to go back to the Bears. I think it's Robinson and Golladay that hit the open market. Of all the teams that could potentially grab one of these guys, the Colts, man, if they brought a Kenny Golladay in, were the Colts sitting there in their office saying, we give up multiple picks for Stafford, pay the money to Kenny Golladay, and what are we right now?
Well, also, they might be in a situation to do the same thing that they did a year ago, which is, okay, we have a ton of cap space to play with. We have a couple of fairly significant needs. Let's take the first-round pick, trade for somebody, give them the monster contract. So the Tampa Bay Bucs might not want to let Chris Godwin leave. They'll franchise tag him. They'll keep him there. But if they franchise tag him, the Colts could easily say, well, we'll send our first-round pick in your direction. Let's do a deal on Chris Godwin. We'll pay him the money, the long-term contract, and that's our number one receiver now. So
would they use that? They didn't want to use the first for Stafford.
Right.
I've brought up Derek Carr before. Would they try to trade for Derek Carr? I mean, at some point, they're going to run out of QB options that are just comparable to Phillip Rivers.
Yes.
And I don't think they want to roll with a rookie
with
this roster.
No.
Like, do they want Mac Jones at the helm? I mean, maybe long term, but they've got a win now proposition here potentially with all that. Again, with all that money, where I think they could throw it at a wide receiver or two, some playmakers.
And presumably Houston is not going to be trading Deshaun Watson within the division, whatever about trading him in the first place. So Stafford made a lot of sense for the Colts, and yet they weren't prepared to offer that first round pick, which is certainly interesting because as much as there will be a lot of quarterback movement this offseason, when you do start to look at the options, like there aren't that many that make a ton of sense for Indianapolis. I mean,
so they might.
A Jameis or a Fitzpatrick would certainly be better than a Jacoby Brissett or insert rookie probably. But
they might have to get creative here.
But it's still a distance behind a Stafford in terms of just knowing what your baseline is going to be.
So you went quarterback, defensive end, Justin Houston, not only getting old, but he's hitting free agency. The Colts have put a bunch of second-round draft capital at the defensive end position with Kiboko Turai, Taquan Lewis, and Ben Banogu. Haven't really gotten great return from any of that. I mean, those guys, they've been solid. They've built a good defensive line rotation. They've built Grover Stewart has developed on the interior. DeForest Buckner, who you mentioned, they brought in. But having a true impact edge defender would absolutely be a big help for this defense. And again, circling back to wide receiver, it's Zach Pascal and Michael Pittman and the Ohio State kid, who I'm not seeing right now, Paris Campbell, who they drafted a couple years ago. Like those guys, all good complementary pieces. Pittman's a good big-bodied possession type. I don't think he's you'd rather have a better player, right? You'd rather him not be your number one.
Yeah.
T.Y. Hilton or Ty hitting free agency right now. So, yeah, they definitely need a receiver.
Yes, they need to replace what T.Y. Hilton used to bring to them. And I'm not even sure that he brings it anymore. But that's the spot that they need to find as a wide receiver.
All right, staying in the AFC South, Jacksonville Jaguars, QB, edge defender, and cornerback. They're another team I think need everything, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I like their young receiving talent, but yeah, they've got a lot of work to do. QB, obviously, and they're almost certainly going to get Trevor Lawrence to shore that up at least.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be answered, assuming Trevor Lawrence is the answer that solves quarterback, and then everything else. They gutted the roster. We said it a bit before. They loaded up for this. They tanked for Trevor Lawrence. They got him. Now the rest of the roster is in ribbons. There's a bunch of young players that might develop into something, even on defense. C.J. Henderson played pretty well right off the bat and then kind of waned as the season went on. Caleb Von Chason came on a little bit stronger towards the end, but you wouldn't exactly look at his rookie season and say, hey, things are heading in the right direction. We're good. Josh Allen, it was better this year before he got injured and got shut down. So pick a spot. They can draft somebody. They can hit free agency. They got the most cap space in the entire NFL. They can upgrade everywhere.
This will be interesting because Urban hasn't really done a whole lot of rebuilding. He kind of stepped into Ohio State. I mean, he's crafty too. Urban's really good at knowing. He got out of Florida. He had Tebow, and then he had John Brantley, who underachieved, former Gator. Underachieved a little bit, and then he got out. Stressed out. Yeah. Why are you stressed out? I got no more good players.
Yeah, that's stressful.
Right?
Yeah.
And then he goes to Ohio State, steps in. I think he went undefeated his first season when they were, they had the sanctions, and he won a lot. And he's great at bringing in good players. But he's never really rebuilt. But to your point, they've got extra draft capital.
Theoretically, though, that's not his job, right?
No, it's not. But you have influence there.
Sure.
And I think they have a chance to just add a lot, whether it's free agency plus the extra draft capital that they do have, to potentially compete right away. So I think they're going to try to do that rather than saying, yeah, we'll see you in 3 years. I think they're going to try to balance that and do both.
I'm curious so remember when the Browns were in the middle of their complete teardown and rebuild, and the idea was once Baker Mayfield was, clearly in year one, once Baker Mayfield was clearly the guy, it's like, oh, wow, we've actually found a quarterback for the first time in God knows how long. Quickly deploy all of the resources. Trade for Odell Beckham Jr., bring in, whatever you do, just hit everything to try and put as good a team around this guy as quickly as possible that we can. And then obviously everything fell apart the next year, and now we're seeing the sort of fruits of that. Is Trevor Lawrence a sure enough thing, do you think, that you can do that immediately, just assuming he's going to be that good? So instead of waiting to see, have we actually found the quarterback, and then we can deploy all these resources? Like, if you're Jacksonville, do you go out and throw all of the money at a Kenny Golladay in free agency and make a big trade and start assembling what you think is a good roster around the quarterback that Trevor Lawrence is going to be, without taking a beat to check that Trevor Lawrence is actually that guy in year one?
That's an interesting one. I do want to see another receiver there. I want everybody to have good receivers, but DJ Chark, nice deep threat. Laviska Shenault, a nice, other piece, and then boom, get another top receiver. That would help Trevor. Nice tight end to throw to, but you're right, up and down the roster. I think they need to spend a little bit more time on the defensive side of the ball. Find a corner to start opposite CJ Henderson, and start there. Edge defenders, yes, you're right. They need development from those guys too, and I wonder how much Urban extracts out of Caleb Vaughn and Josh Allen, the edge. And the Jaguars are going to be a fascinating team for the first time in a long time, or at least since 2017. Kansas City Chiefs, yes, they're heading to the Super Bowl. Let's still talk offseason.
Did you know, by the way, that Tyler Eifert has now gone back-to-back seasons without really getting hurt?
Yeah, it's crazy.
He's not good anymore.
He's not that great anymore. So he's staying healthy. He's just, an okay tight end. Kansas City Chiefs, guard, edge defender, in linebacker, and I might even argue wide receiver.
Oh, wow.
Got to look to the future here if you're the Chiefs. You don't want to get to a point where either Tyreek Hill gets hurt or Travis Kelce gets hurt or those guys regress or something, and it's like, well, Patrick, you're still special, make everybody good. You'd rather have really good
critically,
playmakers.
You know what you don't want? You don't want to ever have an answer as to how much of the receiving group and Andy Reid and how much of all those things are impacting Patrick Mahomes and how much of it is just him.
Right.
In an ideal world, the Kansas City Chiefs never find out how much of this is Mahomes and how much of it is the receiving core and Andy Reid and everything else that's around him. In an ideal world, those things are always there, and therefore Patrick Mahomes is always amazing, because he never has to do it all by himself. But there's a pretty good chance that at some point they're like, you know what, it's Patrick Mahomes. We can afford to go in a different direction and not replace a Tyreek Hill or a Travis Kelce. He'll be the first one to go.
We'll see what happens at the Super Bowl. There's the big narrative for the Super Bowl, which we will preview on
Thursday.
Sorry, somebody posted something. We'll preview it on Thursday, and we'll talk about the offensive line. Mike Remmers is starting at left tackle, and it's not the best-looking offensive line on paper. It's a huge storyline for the Super Bowl. If the offensive line gets beat up and it affects Mahomes, we're going to be going into the offseason saying, okay, this is what they need to shore up. Mitchell Schwartz got hurt. Eric Fisher got hurt.
Everybody got hurt.
Or
opted out.
Right. So they're not. They need to fix the offensive line because Mahomes just can't function. Now, if he goes behind this offensive line and still tears it up, like he probably will, we'd probably say they might treat the offensive line a lot like Seattle did with Russell Wilson and say, maybe we don't need to invest here a whole lot. Mahomes magic, he won't get sacked. He'll get rid of the ball. He'll break tackles and do the whole deal. Let's just give him scary playmakers his whole career. I think this weekend's game will dictate a lot of how the Chiefs handle their team building in future years and what they think they should do around Mahomes.
Yeah, and they're in this spot now of having to make these kinds of decisions. When you hand the quarterback the $500 million contract, you're now going to have to make some difficult decisions. You don't have all the money in the world to construct the perfect roster. So you're going to have to figure out where to nip and tuck and save costs and not put all of your resources. And I think you're right. If you're Kansas City, I think even independent of how this works out, the smart moves would be to say, let's make sure we have resources to always have a Tyreek Hill and a Travis Kelce and, some elite receivers for this guy to throw to. If that means we don't have a great defense top to bottom, okay. If it means we can't put particularly good offensive linemen in front of him, all right, that one's a little more worrying, but it's probably worth the risk. So yeah, I think you're right that it would be easy to say they've got Tyreek Hill, they've got Travis Kelce. Beyond that, who the hell cares? But that's probably a mistake. Let's make sure that we never run into a position where one of those guys goes down, and now you have an offense that's basically got one weapon and is concerning outside of that.
And Hill and Kelce have been like 80% of their offense this postseason. And you look at, there have been games through Sammy Watkins' career where he stepped up and had a huge game.
And he'll be a free agent. So if he walks away and you don't trust Mecole Hardman to step into that expanded role, the question then becomes, okay, one of those guys goes down. Do you then have the Sammy Watkins to step up when everybody like triple teams the other guy?
Right. So I think continuing to attack at playmaker, even though your list is offensive guard, yes. I mean, I think it's a position they have to look at. Edge defender, yes, you want a guy. Frank Clark hasn't been all that productive as a pass rusher. You do want another threat there to help Chris Jones on the interior. And then linebacker seems like this annual issue. I don't know if Willie Gay's the option going forward. He's out of the Super Bowl with an injury. They've tried Anthony Hitchens. You just want a little bit more coverage versatility, I think, at linebacker there, which is fair. I think cornerback's another place, Travarius Ward and Bashad Breeland have been okay, but another place where they could add more depth. L'Jarius Sneed has stepped in, but I think continuing to attack there would be smart for the Chiefs. Let's go to the Raiders. Edge defender, interior defensive line, and safety. Mike Mayock just came out and mentioned the other day they don't have any impact players on defense. Did not have any impact players on defense, which I think is
true.
So
whose fault do you think that is?
They got rid of Khalil Mack. Now, I don't know if that's the biggest issue. My question, look, the Raiders I didn't hate their strategy from a team building standpoint defensively. They threw a lot of things. They didn't have any stars, but you'd try to pay for Corey Littleton and LaMarcus Joyner, and you draft some guys. They got a whole bunch of solid players. It should have worked out a little bit better, but they do lack impact on the defensive side of the ball, which is why that's the need.
This is the risk of just following the data in terms of what you should do from a team building standpoint, because all the analytics says the Raiders won the Khalil Mack trade. What you got back in return for Khalil Mack was worth significantly more than Khalil Mack, even playing at the peak of his powers the way he was for the Raiders before this year, I guess you would say he's played at that level for Chicago, but hasn't really been as productive there as he was in Oakland as it was. But the point is, none of that means anything unless you actually hit on the players you get with the draft picks. So if you miss across the board with the entire haul that you got in for Khalil Mack, all you did is offload Khalil Mack from your roster and from your salary cap, which is something, but it's not.
But the alternative was
winning the trade.
You had Khalil Mack. You didn't have those lottery tickets, which in theory could have hit. I know they didn't. I mean, they weren't terrible, but they didn't. Nothing was, a massive impact. And you just have Khalil Mack, and you have more holes on your defense. Like Trayvon Mullen's at least a solid starter at corner, potentially. So I think the bigger issue is at defensive end, Cleveland Ferrell, Max Crosby, they look better if there's a secondary that can cover. If they have an actual good group of corners as a starting point and a base, and Trayvon Mullen, he's okay. He's got flashes, has flashes. Damon Arnett, don't have high expectations for him, wasn't great as a rookie. I mean, that's the issue, I think, with the Raiders, is starting in the secondary, and then you get disappointment with, Corey Littleton at linebacker this year as a free agent. But it starts in the secondary, and then Ferrell and Crosby and, Maurice Hurst up front, they don't look as bad when you have guys that could, cover receivers for an extra split second or two.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, however you're constructing a roster, you need to actually nail talent acquisition. Like whatever your strategy is,
true.
If you continually swing and miss, it's bad. And that's where the Raiders are right now, is that, as I say, technically they won the Khalil Mack trade. But when you tot it all up, those retrospectives where you look back in a trade and you work out who all the picks were, and then you evaluate who won and lost. When you do that with the Raiders, it's not going to look good. Everything they got for the Khalil Mack trade has not gone well, and they just haven't done well in terms of talent acquisition. So right now, defense for them, period, is just a wreck. That's where they need to move the needle. That's where they need to get significantly better. And that means fixing the things that they've gotten wrong so far. You need to actually start hitting on some of these moves, because that's the problem.
The other issue with team building too is sometimes when you just have to attack one side of the ball, you neglect the other side of the ball. The offense was much better this year, much more efficient. Carr played pretty solid. You added a Henry Ruggs and a Nelson Aguilar, who is hitting free agency. But either way, it's just saying the offense was good, right? And the defense was poor. But they still need help offensively as well, which is, man, they've got a lot of work to do. They honestly just need some of the previous moves to pay off more. Like, they need Corey Littleton to play better. They need Trayvon Mullen to take the next step in year 3 at corner. They need some of the previous moves that don't look good to actually improve for them to take the next step while adding all this other talent defensively.
And Ruggs would be the obvious one for the offense. Like,
sure.
if Ruggs can step in and do what Aguilar was doing this year,
right,
which was supposed to be what Ruggs was doing this year,
average 18 a catch, be a deep threat,
that moves the needle hugely on offense.
So defensive side of the ball, and again, not to sound like a broken record, that's what I do. You got to beat the Chiefs, and to be trotting out a secondary that, yes, they slowed down Mahomes in one game and held him to 30 points and pulled off a win. They're not really equipped to slow down the Chiefs week after week,
ironically,
year after year.
Ironically, they did beat the Chiefs and just couldn't beat enough other people.
Yeah, ironically. Los Angeles Chargers also need to beat the Chiefs in the AFC West. Interior defensive line, what? 10th straight year of that as a need for the Chargers. Tight end, because Hunter Henry's a free agent, and then interior of the offensive line, 10th straight year that they've needed that as well. Chargers still trying to make strides in the trenches.
Was it last podcast we talked about the Minnesota Vikings? Just consistent and total inability to evaluate offensive linemen for years now, regardless of how they've attempted to do it. They should team up and form a club with the Chargers, who have had the same problem as well. Phillip Rivers, for his entire career, never had a good offensive line in front of him. They just could not find offensive linemen that were any good. And the Chargers have tried a lot of different things in the offensive line, just cannot get plus play there. I don't know what it is, but the Chargers and the Vikings cannot evaluate offensive linemen correctly, and have therefore had this problem spot for years now. They found a quarterback. Justin Herbert looked amazing year 1. Looks like the answer there. He was able to do some incredible things under pressure. Was, I think, the number 1 graded quarterback in the NFL under pressure. We know that's not a stable thing. We know that fluctuates year to year, and next year he will almost certainly be significantly worse under pressure. So to offset that inevitable regression, you have to reduce the amount of pressure he's under, which involves getting better offensive linemen, which is something you've been very bad at in the past.
Oh, the poor Chargers, man. I mean, I didn't even think they made the wrong moves. They traded for Trey Turner, last year. And he comes out with by far his worst season. I mean, you thought you were getting a solid guard. I don't think they misevaluated.
But they traded a decent tackle to make that happen.
Now, the actual trade of Russell Okung is a good, solid tackle who is also a free agent right now. And we've seen tackles play into their late 30s and still play pretty well. Jason Peters, Andrew Whitworth. Russell Okung is a good, solid tackle. In the creep back toward average world, Okung is valuable. And I'm not saying the trade itself was right, but you got a guy back in Trey Turner who's at least solid. And he goes and posts a grade of 34.8, Sam. Yeah. And they bring in Brian Bulaga. We loved this move at the time, right? I mean, I like injury risk guys, right? You just hope that they're going to play. All right, he got hurt again. But when he played, it was also the worst grade of his career, too. So I don't know if they're just not evaluating. Like, they brought in a guy in Trey Turner and gave, in Bulaga, and they had their worst seasons. So they're not evaluating well as far as drafting players, but even when they bring in veterans, man, they're getting the worst out of all of them. So,
which again is the same as the Vikings. Like, you bring in a Mike Remmers and you're like, he's a solid player. Okay, you overpaid for him, but at least you guaranteed, solidified that spot. Nope. Remmers was awful.
Like the Vikings moves were right, again, in our world of like, just be okay.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Having Mike Remmers and Riley Reif as your tackle is the epitome of okay.
There's something about these teams and their inability to evaluate these guys properly. I don't know if it's not when you see you see what should be a solid player playing somewhere else and you say, okay, let's bring that guy in. Oh, sure, we got to overpay for him a bit, but it's because the offensive line has been a wreck here. Let's just guarantee something. And then somehow you miss the idea that like that guy was a product of where he was. And when you move him to your Indian burial ground of an offensive line, the whole thing goes to hell. I do not understand why both those teams can't find offensive linemen.
So interior D-line, interior offensive line. Tight end's an interesting one because Hunter Henry, one of the better receiving tight ends in the league. You want to have as many weapons as possible around Justin Herbert. We'll see if they try to bring Henry back or have to go elsewhere, either in the draft or other free agents potentially. All right, Miami Dolphins. You went interior O-line, edge defender, and wide receiver. Discuss.
I think so. A lot of people will say their offensive line is fine. It's good, in fact. I think it's worse than it looked. I think they did a lot of things to protect the offensive line that are similar to what they were doing to protect the quarterback. Those things are symbiotic. And I know that they loaded up with a bunch of young talent on the offensive line. And in particular, Austin Jackson was a tackle in the first round that we always thought would be more of a project player. His transition to the NFL would be more bumpy than the other first-round tackles who almost all played extremely well. That being said, he's a first-round tackle. They're not going to give up on him after year one, with the possible exception of getting a shot at like a Penei Sewell, And that would then become a really interesting discussion because Robert Hunt on the other side was actually the better of the two tackles as a rookie. Right. So now what do you do if you draft a Sewell? Do you put Austin Jackson on the bench or do you put the better player on the bench and say first-round pick takes precedence? He's going to start at right tackle.
But anyway, Hunt could play guard if needed as well.
I think tackle will be okay, or tackle is taken care of by the fact that you have a guy that played okay in Robert Hunt and a guy that was a first-round pick and will therefore get year two to show. The interior was just weaker, and I know that they've got some young players there as well, but they could do with an upgrade.
Defensive end, another interesting one. It is the Patriots level or Patriots type of system, or maybe it's not looking for elite edge rushers, but you still want guys that can win one-on-one, and they didn't really have that last year, especially given the investment that they made in the secondary last year, bringing in a Byron Jones at corner and having Xavier Howard on the other side, being able to get a little bit more pressure beyond Emmanuel Ogbah and Kyle Van Noy and Christian Wilkins up front would absolutely help the Dolphins. Receiver-wise, though, it is interesting. We talk about weapons a lot. It is interesting how different their weapons look when Fitz was out there, kind of giving guys an opportunity to make plays, versus Tua, who wasn't as aggressive, didn't throw the ball downfield as much. Fitz definitely got the most out of Devontae Parker, Mike Gesicki, but no matter who the quarterback is, you still would like to have other options there.
They have at least three receivers that play into that style of, YOLO passing. Parker, Preston Williams, and Gesicki, I think, are all receivers that would do better with a quarterback that's willing to just put the ball in their general area code and hope they make a play at the catch point.
Yeah, for sure.
Tua is more suited to the Alabama style of receiver where those guys are going to be 5 yards open every single play, and he's accurate enough to just put it on them. Yes, that sounds ridiculous in terms of course, the quarterback is going to look good when he's thrown to a guy with 5 yards of separation, but there are quarterbacks for whom that will help more than others. Like Fitzpatrick doesn't care if the guy's open. He's going to throw it in his general direction anyway.
I will say, one of the skill sets I think quarterbacks have, everybody talks about throwing with anticipation, but I think there's value in the ability to see something and then just put it where you want. I thought that was one of the best things Tua did.
Right.
It's not that he was playing slow, but sometimes he wanted to confirm this guy's open, and then when he did, okay, boom, he'd put it where he wanted accurately. And I don't think he's great at anticipating guys or throwing guys open the way a Fitz would be. I think when you're looking for receivers for the Dolphins, you always say get the guys who get open Yes, get the guys who are going to create more separation, because I do think that also plays to Tua's skill set, to your point.
Everyone sort of talks about how it's such an easy environment being that Alabama quarterback where everybody's wide the hell open every single play, that when you get to the NFL level, you're just going to be it creates this sort of myth, and it's not an accurate portrayal of how good that player is. But the other thing is, it probably makes the transition to the NFL level harder for that guy, because we've talked before about how this is NFL open, right? It's not college open.
You're not going to tell the Peyton Manning story again, are you?
Well, I'm just saying that Peyton Manning had to get instructed on, like, this guy is actually open at the NFL level, and he had to relearn how to read and therefore target the right guy. Imagine then coming from Alabama, where a guy is like 5-10 yards open every single play, and you have to now look up and see a guy who's covered in your world and decide that guy is open and throw him the ball. It's the same way for every college player, but for Alabama, it's worse because they're further open. So for somebody that you would have immediately looked up and said, that guy's covered, forget it, move on to the guy that's open, you now have to adjust your entire thought process and decide to throw that guy the ball at the NFL level. I'm just saying that while it benefited them all the way through their college career and potentially made him a higher draft pick than he could have been otherwise, it also probably makes his adjustment period in the NFL a longer and harder one. So when he does hesitate in year one and does look slower and process slower than you expected him to be, that's probably part of it.
Yeah, it's a good point, and I think that's why the Bama receivers, Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, I think they're in play for the Dolphins in the first round. Maybe not at 3, but potentially their second first-round pick. Waddle, Smith, Kadarius Toney, Rondale Moore. I think those guys fit. And Rashad Bateman, guys who just good route runners who are going to create some separation for Tua, unless they go and get Deshaun Watson if you're the Dolphins. All right, New England Patriots, their biggest needs. QB, wide receiver, and tight end.
Yeah.
The entire passing attack needs help.
The QB and the guy he needs to throw to.
Okay, so there were reports from Tom Curran, friend of the show, New England beat writer for many years. He reported that Matthew Stafford was open to a trade, but not to New England. Your thoughts?
Why would that be? Could it be that they have recently hired a coach that came from Detroit, didn't have a great time there?
Is it because of Patricia? Is it because the weapons are terrible? Is it because he doesn't actually want to play for Belichick?
Yeah.
I've seen people make this point too, that when you remember when everybody was taking hometown discounts or just taking discounts to go to New England to win a championship?
Yeah.
Just to bring up the Brady versus Belichick thing again, people have made the point that, well, they wanted to go play with Tom.
Yeah.
Just like Antonio Brown did, just like Gronk did. Like, they want to go play with Tom wherever he is, not so much play for Belichick. Of course, it's together. It's the whole system, the program.
That's probably the same argument as, like, which one was the reason they were winning the Super Bowls. It's like it's all of it together. When all of it was together, they were the favorites, the prohibitive favorites to win any given Super Bowl the next year. Therefore, if you're looking at where you want to go in free agency, I want to go to the place that's going to win the ring. They always win the ring, so I'm going to New England. Which one was the bigger percentage of that is irrelevant. The point is now it isn't. Like, now, next year, the Patriots are not anywhere near the favorites to win the Super Bowl. Therefore, why would I want to, like, why would I choose them?
Yeah, because they don't have a quarterback, but you're also, if you're the quarterback that doesn't want to go, you're the quarterback that doesn't want to go there?
But that never came up. You know, they never had, like, there was never a quarterback who had to make a decision about where he wanted to go.
True.
Oh, I'm going to go to New England because they've got Tom Brady and Bill Belichick and we'll win a Super Bowl.
But you have Tommy in Tampa bringing all his friends down there.
What I'm saying is now if you're evaluating where you want to go to win a Super Bowl, like, nobody is choosing New England over Kansas City or apparently Tampa Bay. Like, they're not going to win. So why would I go there over somebody else?
So their win now, everybody expects the Patriots to compete, right? They just expect that. Belichick gives you a baseline of success and their defense. Their win now options at quarterback just got a little slimmer with Matthew Stafford off the market.
Yeah. They're in a similar spot to the Colts, where they desperately need a starting quarterback, but the options are not amazing. They probably don't have the ammunition to be in the Deshaun Watson sweepstakes, even if that's an option. Which puts them in the market for one of these lower tier quarterbacks.
They're almost certainly going to attack receiver and tight end this offseason, right?
Have to.
Like last season, it seemed like a massive need. They had just invested a first rounder in N'Keal Harry. You can almost say, okay, you've got Julian Edelman and you're going to invest in N'Keal Harry and Jacoby Myers has developed. Like you could talk yourself into the high end of all these guys.
Last year, yeah.
Will work okay. But this year, Belichick has done a good job through the years as a team builder, identifying weaknesses and attacking it. And he's been conservative in some ways, but in other ways, it's like he went out and got a Stephon Gilmore at corner and Darrelle Revis at corner. He traded a first rounder for Brandon Cooks. Like they traded for Andy Moss. Like they've made moves to shore up weaknesses before. I'm assuming they're going to look at receiver and or tight end and say, we need at least 2 or 3 guys right now to make this situation better as far as playmakers.
And they still made moves recently. It's just that none of them worked out. Like they took a swing at Antonio Brown when he was toxic.
And Mohamed Sanu.
They drafted or traded for Mohamed Sanu. They sent a first round pick, their first for years, on a wide receiver in N'Keal Harry. It's just that none of those moves worked out, and they were already walking that sort of tightrope of depth at the positions, receiver and tight end. That as soon as 1 or 2 of those moves stopped working out, the whole house of cards came crumbling down. So. You're right. Now, what becomes interesting is now they don't need to just make one move. They need to completely overhaul the thing. So they need to throw a bunch of they need to attack receiver and tight end in both free agency and the draft and or trades. And I don't know if they're willing to do that, particularly when they still need to find a quarterback.
Yeah, and they just they drafted 2 third-round tight ends. I don't think they're attached to Devin Asiasi and Dalton Keene, but I think they'd be okay rolling with them if they had better receiving talent, at least as a starting point. So another fascinating offseason in New England. Last year, I wrote the story in the draft that it was just kind of business as usual coming out of the draft for New England. Which was, you got a safety here and a hybrid player there. Like they need impact players in New England, particularly on offense. It can't be business as usual this year. So it's going to be an interesting one.
Well, I mean, Asiasi's his curve is heading upwards. He got his first 2 catches in week 17. So you project that forward and you're flying.
He's a 100 catch guy next year. All right, let's go to the New York Jets. QB picking at number 2 overall, so almost assuredly going to be drafting a QB unless they talk themselves into Sam Darnold.
Which is sounding possible. There's a lot of people talking up Sam Darnold from that building.
Which is good for trading him, maybe?
You would hope.
I mean, look, if I took the Jets job this offseason, I would say all sorts of beautiful things about Sam Darnold. He's young. He's only 19 years old still, right? I mean, he's going to get better.
The problem, agreed. But there's also a lot of analysts out there that still love Sam Darnold. You're the biggest of them, Steve. There's a lot of analysts out there that think that Sam Darnold is just has just been in a crappy situation. You piece all those things back together, and he's still an elite talent at quarterback, and he's the guy that's going to get it done.
I liked Sam Darnold. I think he has done some good things. I think he's been in a horrible situation.
Yeah.
I will talk about Sam Darnold. He might even be a top 32 QB in the world. Okay? The same phrase I use for Jameis and for Mariota and for Andy Dalton. They might be in the top 32. Trubisky's potentially in the top 32, maybe closer to 40. I don't want Sam Darnold to be – I don't want to be the guy that has to start him. That's all. That's where I am with him. If he's my backup, great.
I'm in the same world as I am with Drew Lock, which is I can –
Top 32 in the world? Drew? Is he better than Darnold?
No.
I don't think so either.
No to both questions. No, he's not in the top 32, and no, he's not better than
I think Darnold might be 32 right now. But the potential for Darnold is to get to like 20, 15?
Well, my point is, I think there is a world where Darnold does put it all together and you get a good quarterback out of it. The problem is that at this point, how could you possibly put all of your chips on that? Like, you're playing the percentages whenever you're talking about team building and strategy going forward. And this is the most important position in the game. You have the number 2 overall pick. You should have had the number 1 overall pick. You don't. You got the number 2 overall pick. What has a better chance of being true? That the number 2 overall pick, Justin Fields or Zach Wilson or whoever it is going to be a quality starting quarterback, or that the mess that is Sam Darnold right now is going to turn it all around and become a better quarterback than that guy. I would say the chances, if you're just playing the odds, the chances have to be better that the rookie is good right out of the gate, particularly when what we've seen from rookies in recent years. They have been reasonably good and better than expectation for the most part. I think you can definitely talk yourself into the idea that Sam Darnold can be pieced back together and reclaimed and turned good. I just don't think it could possibly be the more likely of the outcomes you have available to you, at which point rolling with that as a strategy just seems like a bad move.
You summed it up well. That's it. I mean, that's the bottom line. I would rather take the shot on a Zach Wilson or a Justin Fields, being my QB of the future, than like drafting another tackle or whatever it might be. I mean, if they were going to trade down for a massive haul and then know that maybe you're not building around Sam Darnold, but you're doing this whole like put the pieces in place and we'll get to the quarterback when we get to him, I would understand that as a strategy. But you don't always get to pick number 2 overall.
Yeah.
And when you pick number 2 overall and there's a QB of the caliber of Zach Wilson or Justin Fields, you at least have to take that chance.
This was the argument, and it's not a great argument based off how the quarterbacks have panned out, but this was the argument that we were making a couple of years ago with the New York Giants.
For Sam Darnold.
Yes. It's like when was the last time you picked number 2 overall? It doesn't happen that often. So don't turn down the chance at taking the quarterback. It doesn't mean that you'll hit it, which they didn't. Like, it doesn't mean that guy will work out, but you shouldn't pass up that opportunity. It's too good a chance because of the draft position.
Should I come off my priors then and say, a couple of years ago, I thought the Giants made a mistake by not picking Sam Darnold. Now, do I look like an idiot because Sam Darnold hasn't panned out?
Well,
therefore,
because look who they picked.
Forget about the Saquon Barkley thing, but they were right to not pick Sam Darnold, right? Just that particular decision was right to not pick Sam Darnold. Maybe they should have picked Josh Allen.
There you go.
But they were right to not pick Sam Darnold. Or comes back to you have to keep swinging at QB. Whether Zach Wilson or Justin Fields is the guy or not, there's a chance that they are, and you have to keep swinging and then build the pieces around that. And the Jets do have other pieces to build, which includes cornerback and edge defender. Corner is a massive one that they need to attack.
You have to accept that quarterback is it's still not easy to find a new starting quarterback. And when you need one, you have to keep going. Sometimes you're going to miss. And okay, that sucks, but keep reloading. You can't allow the fact that it's hard to find a quarterback prevent you from trying again when you mess it up the first time. Like, there's this tendency, Mike Renner wrote an article about it, like teams talk themselves into bad quarterbacks because they still haven't found one. So you don't want to restart. You don't want to go, oh man, we really screwed that up last time. We've got to do the whole thing again. And if we screw it up again, everyone's getting fired. Like, the alternative is you think you talk yourself into keep going with the guy that already failed. Like, that's not going to go any better. If you're the Chicago Bears, it's not going to go better for you to talk yourself into Trubisky than it is to accept that you missed on Trubisky and try and do better the next time. Like, that's not going to be a better solution. So for Sam Darnold, he hasn't shown you anything to suggest that he can be the guy. So don't talk yourself into the idea that he is just because you missed. Like, swing again.
Is it even worse that the Rams re-upped Jared Goff after his peak? I mean, it's like going all in on Bitcoin when it's at its peak, Sam.
It is. The Jared Goff contract was bad, but understanding that he then crapped out and we need to get the hell away from that is way smarter than staying longer with a quarterback that hasn't done it.
But it's the same thing. You know, we've talked about this QB market and how hard is it to find a Jared Goff? How hard is it to find a Sam Darnold? In today's NFL, how difficult is it to find those guys? And if that's the case, don't pay them. Just find the next,
but once
get Marcus Mariota in there.
But once you've already sunk that cost, don't you agree that it's a far better decision to take on the highest dead cap hit in NFL history and get rid of that guy than it is to keep talking yourself into the idea that Jared Goff could turn it around and be a top 5 quarterback sometime in the future?
Yes, agreed.
Right. So that's a smarter thing to do than these teams that took a swing at a quarterback and can't talk themselves out of the fact that that guy isn't the guy you thought he was going to be.
Bottom line for the Jets, I think they have the same holes that they had last year. They took some strides at wide receiver. They took some strides on the offensive line. Still an issue. Cornerback, massive issue. Got to figure out QB first. That is the Jets.
Yep.
Go all in and get Deshaun Watson. All right, a couple more teams in the AFC. Pittsburgh Steelers, what a fascinating place they are in right now. QB, it is a need because we either don't know what Ben Roethlisberger is going to do, and we also just don't know what he has left.
Yeah.
Interior O-line, really the entire offensive line needs help. And running back. Whoa, you put running back as a need. Remember, so like last year at this time, Steelers fans were talking about, hey, let's use our first pick, which is in the second round, on a running back. That's the missing piece.
Yeah.
And if they had done that, man, the holes would look even bigger along the roster here.
Yeah. I think critically, whether Roethlisberger is the quarterback or not, you need to start looking at quarterback. Like this is whether or not he is. Either you need a succession plan pretty immediately. Like if he's playing one more year. Or even if he plays one more year, the way he was playing this season for periods, there's a chance that you might have to go to the rookie next year anyway. Like if you draft Roethlisberger's replacement as your first pick and Roethlisberger plays 6 games of like atrocious play, you might have to be like, okay, the rookie succession plan is accelerated. Let's throw him in there.
It's interesting because I've been doing mock drafts for years, and I've always been the guy that said the class of 2004, the Rivers, Roethlisberger, Eli class, those teams should have been looking for their next QB for like 4 or 5 years now. Just have that in hand. And the Giants didn't until they had the opportunity, and then they drafted Daniel Jones. The Chargers didn't really have a great plan, and then they got in position to draft Justin Herbert. The Steelers, on the other hand, kind of keep winning, other than the 1 year where Big Ben got hurt.
Yeah.
So they haven't really been in position.
Then they went like 500.
And they still went 500 with the Mason and Duck. So they haven't really been in position to look to the future, other than you throw a third rounder at Mason Rudolph. Great. I mean, that's a good move. That's what you should do is grab those third rounders and everything. So now they're in the spot where the entire offensive line, Ali Villanueva is a free agent. Marquise Pouncey all but assuredly going to be retiring. So you need offensive line help. The defense, have they peaked essentially the last couple of years, being one of the league's best? Can they even maintain that? Cornerback's going to need an overhaul. Mike Hilton's going to be a free agent. Joe Hayden's due a ton of money. They've got cap issues, and they have no idea what they have in Big Ben. Should they just treat this offseason as the first step in the rebuild? Maybe somebody wants to take on Big Ben. Maybe the Patriots want to take Big Ben for a year and save him first. Do the Steelers go full rebuild?
I don't think there's no way they would move on from Big Ben in those terms.
He said he wants to restructure. He's got a massive cap hit. He wants to restructure.
And the problem is, as long as he's your quarterback, you can't rebuild. Like you can't. There's no way you can sort of say, all right, this is the first year of the succession plan and the rebuild and the overhaul we're going to have to do, while you have your old quarterback coming back for one last go-around. You do what the Saints did, which is we have to keep kicking the can down the road and loading up for as many one more goes as Roethlisberger wants to take. But I think, unlike the Saints, who are just like, we'll figure out a quarterback at the end of this thing sometime. We got this guy, Taysom Hill. He might be able to do it. I think most franchises should probably have a better succession plan in place than that. And that's where the Steelers are right now. Man,
they just available cap space right now. Saints, of course, in a special world.
How negative are they?
$112 million for the Saints. It's interesting that the teams that are in the worst situation also didn't. Well, some teams won, some teams didn't. Saints 112.
You know what my favorite thing about that is? They're $112 million in the hole, negative salary cap space, but only $380,000 of dead cap space. It's not even like they're buried under a world of dead cap hell. They're just
it's great. So the Saints are the worst at 112 over the cap. Eagles 53, Falcons 36, and then the Steelers at 34. So if you're the Saints, you're like, I know how I got here. We made a Super Bowl run. If you're the Eagles, like you kind of tried to make a run, it didn't always work out. If you're the Falcons or the Steelers, you're like, man, if you're the Falcons, you lost a lot of football to get to this point. If you're the Steelers, you kind of understand too. You made a run and you're in trouble now.
There is $185 million between the most salary cap space and the least salary cap space in the NFL in 2021. And the salary cap is $176 million.
That's great. That's a good stat. Drop it in Lighthouse. That's a stat. Jaguars and Saints on the top. The Rams have $31 million in dead cap space as well.
They have the top 2 dead cap hits in NFL history.
Yes.
Because of the contracts they've been dumping.
So as much as we talk about, hey, they're bringing in Stafford, but like...
Stafford, by the way, is in the top 5.
Yeah. So they're bringing in more money. They've got the dead cap space. They don't have a first-round pick until like a decade from now. I mean, there's a lot of interesting things happening with the Rams. But back to the Steelers. Are they in full rebuild mode? I do Steelers radio. I do Pittsburgh radio once a week, and those guys are very sad. They're like, give me something to be optimistic about. I was like, Big Ben could get back together. He could, be better next year. I mean, that's their only hope. He restructures, and he's just better. They had $1 million option years to spread the cap hit and then run it back.
I think they need to look for his succession plan, regardless of whether they hit or not on that guy. And then they do what you can with the rest of what you have left. I also think if you're the fact that those 3 guys are all tied together, Eli Manning, Phillip Rivers, and Ben Roethlisberger, the fact that 2 of them declined and walked away already should probably be on your radar, at least in terms of where you are.
That's a good point.
Like, sure, Roethlisberger could be Tom Brady and, buck the
there's
rules
not
of physics.
One sign that that's the case.
No, there isn't. But, if in terms of like in his brain, right, you could be like, oh, sure, you could be Tom Brady and therefore be able to defy the laws of biomechanics and biology for the next 10 years and keep on trucking when everyone else in your peer group declines and fizzles away. On the other hand, you're probably just the same as they are. And those 2 guys, like Eli's been out of the game for a while now, and Phillip Rivers just walked away having had a declined season by his standards. You're probably next pretty quickly.
It's all about perspective. I think PFF grade, PFF Elite, Super Bowl 25, get your 25% off. Great. Go check out Ben Roethlisberger's page. In 2000, here's what happened the last 3 years with Big Ben. 78 grade in 2018, which was his lowest grade since 2011. So he already started a bit of a dip, even though he threw for 5,000 yards. Who cares? He dipped. 2019, plays a game, gets hurt. He was bad in the game and then gets hurt. He's out for the season. So he's getting older, getting hurt. This past year, 69 overall grade. I don't care about his 33 touchdowns and 10 interceptions during the regular season. He did not play that well. 69 grade, his worst since 2008 now. So 3 straight years of worst grade since or a massive injury. It's 3 years of evidence that Big Ben is going the wrong way.
It might be worse than it looked this year as well because one of the lowest average depths of target in the NFL, quick game, all those kinds of things, those were actually working. And also, the only reason his grade was as good as it was is because his performance on third down was absurd, which again, we know is not a stable, predictive thing. I think Roethlisberger probably is better at that than the average quarterback and has some shot of maintaining a higher standard than average at that. But if he regresses slightly on third down and doesn't get better anywhere else, like that grade will fall off a cliff.
All right, so some massive holes in Pittsburgh. They, interior O-line, running back. I think they got to look at corner as well. All right, let's wrap it up with the Tennessee Titans. Edge defender, cornerback, and offensive tackle. Just drafted a first-round offensive tackle last year. That was one of the big stories this year. Their tackles,
which I didn't see mentioned anywhere. Basically, the Wilson thing, like that's one
Isaiah
of the worst.
Wilson was the draft pick.
That's one of the worst draft picks in years. They desperately needed tackles, and their first-round tackle got in trouble multiple times with COVID lists, and I think got in legal trouble and everything. Basically, got on the field for 3 kneel downs at the end of one game, and then was deactivated and benched.
Yeah, they they pulled our friend Marshall Newhouse out of retirement to play a little bit of football. The tackle situation was pretty bad last year for the Titans. So I think, they lost Jack Conklin, tried to replace him with Isaiah Wilson. Taylor Lewan got hurt. It was not great. So it's still kind of a hole for them. Their pass rush was poor. They tried to solve that with Jadeveon Clowney. Clowney's going to be a free agent again. And I think, again, we rank Clowney kind of high in the free agent list just because of his body of work, and he's still a pretty good run defender. But he didn't solve their pass rush issues. And cornerback is an interesting one because I thought part of the reason why Tennessee was so good the last couple of years is because they were rolling 3 deep at corner, which is why I said last year Christian Fulton was one of the most important draft picks of the draft. Just try to keep them solid at that position. But having Desmond King as a free agent and trying to roll 3 deep there at cornerbacks, definitely a smart move for the Titans.
Yeah, none of those moves that they made at corner really panned out for them, which was a big blow. Corner is a bit like linebacker. Like if your new young cornerbacks did not fare well last year at all, and it's another spot where I don't know if that changed, like because of the way the NFL just gave the green light to passing offenses. Does that change how you should build defense now? Whereas before we would say throw all the draft picks at cornerbacks, bring in all these young guys. Almost all of them just got lit on fire last year. So is that your strategy going forward, or do you pivot and say, let's try and bring in some veterans that have been able to keep their head above water in this league last year, as opposed to let's bring in a rookie who's going to get toasted?
Another potential need for the Titans, Sam, wide receiver. Adam Humphries, they're paying a ton of money. I wonder if he's a guy that, with potential cap casualty. Corey Davis hits free agency. I remember mocking a first-round wide receiver to them last year. I mocked T. Higgins to them in the first round last year, thinking a year ahead, right? You got T. Higgins for a year. Corey Davis hits free agency. T. Higgins is your number 2. I think they have to look at a legitimate number 2 now, opposite A.J. Brown. You're not going to pay Corey Davis big-time money.
Yep, fair.
So I think receiver is another issue potentially for the Titans.
Fair.
Man, that's a lot of good discussion there. We didn't get to even more. Do we have to talk Stafford Goff anymore, or is it just push people to the Daily? The Daily has a really good discussion on Stafford and Goff, so go check that out. But a lot of things at play. I think they traded for Carson Palmer. Carson Palmer, late career. That's Matthew Stafford. Go check out the PFF NFL Daily. Super Bowl 25 is your promo code for this week, 25% off. Any PFF subscription, I suggest Elite. Go get it right now. Super Bowl 25. All right, Sam, we'll be back on Thursday. We'll preview the Super Bowl, and then we'll talk a little bit more free agency. We're bringing our guy Brad on here, contract expert, talk about where some guys might land, what the biggest contracts might look like in free agency. So thanks to everybody for tuning in. Go check out the NFC team needs from last Thursday. This was AFC team needs, and we'll be back here on Thursday previewing the Super Bowl, talking some free agency. See you Thursday. You gave the wave that people said that they wanted you to. Yeah, that's good. You listen. You read the YouTube comments, or that was a
tweet.
Tweet.
Pretty sure it was a tweet.
Man of the people, Sam.
Yeah.
You've come a long way. I'm glad you waved.